Hello everyone, welcome to another booktube video. My name is Ailsa and today I'm going to be talking about my favourite books that I've read so far this year. The first one on my list I read in January, and that is Vicious by V.E. Schwab, also known as Victoria Schwab. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with her and her books already. She wrote the Shades of Magic or Shades of London series. That is A Darker Shade of Magic, A Gathering of Shadows and A Conjuring of Light, and also Our Dark Duet and This Savage Song, all of which I've read. My husband bought this book when we were going on our honeymoon in the autumn and I knew I had to read it, and somehow it took me like 4 months to get around to it. But read it in January and absolutely loved it. I read it really quick. This is in a way a superhero book. It's about Victor and Eli, who meet as college roommates. They're both slightly odd ones out in their class. They're two quite smart people. They end up as roommates and they're really good friends until they're doing, like, I can't remember what they call it, but it's the equivalent of their dissertation in their final year of their degrees. And somehow they're interested in supernatural abilities and what causes people to develop these and if they're a real thing. They do some experiments, things happen. This book I think is really cool. It's told with multiple timelines going on. So the very first page is last night, and then over the course of the story you jump back to 10 years ago, I think it is, when they're in college, and then forward to like now, or forward to 2 days ago or a week ago and things, and it jumps around telling the story of how Victor's just broken out of prison and what's going to happen next. I love this. I love the questions that you often get in superhero type stories of who's the bad guy, who's the good guy, what makes someone the good guy or the bad guy, and those kind of shades of grey that you get in between things. It was really good book. There is a sequel called Vengeful, which I don't have yet, but I'm definitely planning to buy soon. Maybe once I get through the lockdown books that arrived the other day. That can be my next one if we're still stuck inside, if I need to pad myself up a bit. But I highly recommend Vicious by Victoria Schwab if you haven't had a chance to read it yet. Next is Deal with the Devil by Rocha. I will pop a photo on the screen of this book. I read it as an e-arc through NetGalley. Rocha are a pair of authors who I have been following for many years now. They wrote a series called the Beyond series, which is set in a post-apocalyptic America. There have been solar storms that knocked out a lot of power and things, and America as it is now in their book is very different from how we would recognise it today, even with the current stay-at-home situation. Those books are quite steamy and they were self-published by the authors. Deal with the Devil is published by, I want to say, Tor. This is set in that same world at that same kind of period as the Beyond series, but in a very different part of America. I think Beyond is somewhere in the deserts, like kind of Arizona, Nevada kind of area. Don't know enough about my US geography to guess properly beyond the little snippets that we've had here and there of clues. Anyway, Deal with the Devil is over on the East Coast. If memory serves, they're in Atlanta, I want to say. Pretty sure it's Atlanta. And they travel around kind of there a bit. This is about a woman called Nina and a guy called Knox. Nina lives with two women who she is not related to, but they really consider themselves family. All three of them have extraordinary abilities of some kind. For Nina, it's that she's like super smart, she's got amazing reactions, and she's really good at fighting. And these three women, they've earned a bit of money through various means, and they are trying their best to use that money to look after their little community in the area of the city that they live in. And one of the things that they do is, as a project, are collecting books and then printing them into physical copies that people can then share around. And this is where the mercenary librarians side of the story comes in. That is the series name. They're creating kind of a little library for their community. Knox, meanwhile, he's a soldier, and he's a soldier working for a tech company who have been bioengineering people. So he has a chip in his head that lets him talk to his teammates. He also has other augmented abilities. He's had something done to his hands to make them more than human. And his team have been put into a really awkward situation where now the only way out of their awkward situation is to go and deliver Nina, and I can't remember if it's her friends as well, or like the three of them, or if it's just her. They've got to deliver her to this place somewhere else, and then that's how they get out of their awkward situation. So the two groups meet up and sparks fly between Nina and Knox, because this is a Kit Rocha novel. There's going to be some romance in there. The groups together set off driving several days' drive away from Atlanta. They have to camp in a few places on the way. They see some towns that have reacted differently to the crisis, like lots of different communities and different ways of life that you see that have sprung up across this post-apocalyptic America, just in the few little towns that they drive through. And unfortunately, over the course of this journey, Knox and Nina come to like each other, and of course that causes problems to the fact that Knox is pretty sure he's handing her over to a death sentence. This is an absolutely fantastic book. I was really excited that Kit Rocha were getting a major publisher, and therefore that more people will hear about them. And it sounded like such a cool concept to have mercenary librarians and to stay in this post-apocalyptic world that they've created and that I love reading about. But part of me was nervous that some of the things that make a Kit Rocha book to me were going to get lost in that transition to maybe trying to become more mainstream with it being a bigger publisher. But I needn't have worried. Maybe there's fewer sex scenes than there normally are, but never fear, there is a lot of steaminess. There is some sexy times with people. The other thing that I love about Kit Rocha books is how community and taking care of people is such a huge part of the story, and that absolutely is there in Deal with the Devil as well, so I highly recommend that book. The next book I'm going to talk about is Give Birth Like a Feminist by Milli Hill. This is a non-fiction book. Again, I read it as an ebook. It was published by HQ in the autumn. I started reading this book when I knew that I was planning to have a child but wasn't yet pregnant, and over the course of reading it I discovered that I was pregnant, and it was a really interesting time for me to be reading this. It covers a lot of things about how birth is a feminist issue. A lot of the time people's rights and what you should be entitled to during childbirth get pushed out the window apparently in the delivery room, and say nothing ever goes to plan, so why bother? And Milli Hill points out that that's a really stupid attitude to have. It's not a very nice attitude to have, and a lot of things that happen are based on it coming from men being the doctors and the ones who are primarily looking after women in childbirth in the last couple of hundred years. After everyone decided that midwives were witches and things and hunted them down, they never quite got back that position of being the experts. I highly recommend it if you are expecting a child or not, if you just want to read a bit more about women's rights and how this is maybe an aspect of feminism that doesn't get talked about quite so much. Yeah, it was really, really interesting book. A bit scary in some places to see what's considered a normal practice in some parts of the world. Really, really interesting. Disappointing to see that even in Britain some horrible things still happen. But equally there was a lot of hope, and it was really interesting to read about what you are entitled to in the UK, and that you can push back on certain things and say, no, it's me that's having this baby, listen to me. So that was really, really interesting. The fourth book that I want to mention that I really loved so far this year is What Have I Done? By Laura Dockrill. This is clearly a proof. That's actually the back of the book where it has the title, and on the front it says, this is not a self-help book, it's the start of a conversation. Laura Dockrill is a children's author. I saw her read at the Lush Book Club. I thought it was last year, but maybe 2 years ago, where she was talking about her book Big Bones that had just come out at the time, that was a YA novel. Laura Dockrill suffered from postpartum psychosis, which is another, it's related to postnatal depression, but it's a different separate thing. And this book goes through her journey of starting with her birth story and then what happened after that, how things just didn't go as she and her partner had expected, and she got really quite ill and had to go to a special treatment facility and things, and it's just opening up the conversation of the fact that this happens to actually a not insignificant number of women after they've had a baby, and yet it's not really talked about. that was really, really interesting, and I highly recommend it. It was due to come out in May this year, but I don't know if that date has been changed based on the current coronavirus situation. I'll put a little note if it has. But yeah, really, really loved that book, and it was very, very interesting. I'll pop a picture of the finished cover in here as well for you to see. The last book that I wanted to talk about that I've loved this year is one that I mentioned in my last video as being a current read. It's one that I finished reading quite recently, and that is Meddling Kids by Edgar Cantero. This is a book about 4 people now in their mid-20s and their dog, who when they were younger, they used to go out and spend their summers in this house by the lake in Oregon and solve mysteries. It's a really, really fun book, but it's also a really creepy horror story at the same time, because they have now reunited about 12 or 13 years after their last case, because they've realised that there was more going on there than they let themselves acknowledge at the time. They might have caught the guy in the mask, but actually there was something way more sinister going on behind the scenes. This book is about their investigation and figuring out what was happening. There's some demon summoning type stuff. There's going through creepy minds. But there are loads of little nods to all these, like the Enid Blyton novels with like the Famous Five and the Secret Seven, these groups of kids with their dog. Nancy Drew is referenced somewhere, the Hardy Boys is referenced. I'm sure there are ones that I didn't catch, but there are so many little nods to those things, particularly Scooby-Doo. So for example, the kids call themselves the Blyton Summer Detective Club because the area they are in is Blyton Hills. The river that flows into this lake they're beside is the Zoinks River, which I believe is what Shaggy would say to Scooby all the time in Scooby-Doo. There's so many fun little nods to popular culture like that, and I really enjoyed that. It describes things in this really vivid way, and it also from time to time drops into being narrated like a bit of a script, just for like half a page, which I just thought was... It unsettled me at first, but it's just part of the book. It was a lot of fun. So if you're looking for a horror novel with a lighter side to it as well, then I definitely recommend that. And if you were a fan of Scooby-Doo or the Famous Five or any other Enid Blyton detective stories when you're a kid or anything else along those lines, I definitely recommend this as well. So that is 5 books that I have absolutely loved so far this year. I'd be really interested to hear if you've read any of these or what your top books of the year have been so far. And I will talk to you very soon. Bye!